special broadcast this evening. The last couple of weeks here, you've been listening to Usama Doc's Freedom or Surrender. I hope everyone's been able to get that information and maybe even went and ordered themselves a copy of that CD. Today, I'm going to introduce you to another friend from my other network. This is Andrew. His name's Andrew. Man's a genius on many levels. He speaks from the theology side. Now, this is not the quick explanation. When people hear theology right away, of course, they think of religion. The study of theology is the dogma of a religion. In other words, unchanging, things that do not change. Such as, like Christians. All right, in order to be a Christian, the theology of that is God, the Creator, Jesus, the Son of God. That's unchanging. All the rest are different disciplines within. You know, some priests are married, some are not, some eat meat on Friday, some do not. All right? Those are the different disciplines of a religion. When we speak theology, we're talking about the parts of that theology that is unchanging. In other words, for Islam, the word would be abrogated. You know, we hear about the words such as abrogated verses. In other words, those verses no longer count. Okay, they've been removed. They're still printed, but supposedly, they're no longer being utilized, if you will. So when you hear somebody say they specialize or are speaking about theology, they're talking about the dogma of that particular religion. With that being said up front, I also want to make everybody aware, please. I don't know if anybody else is having trouble tonight. I've tried a couple of browsers. The Freedom Reigns website chat room does not seem to be working tonight. It was there this morning, and all of a sudden, it's just cycling, and it will not engage. So please, everybody, if you can, jump over to the Blog Talk Radio chat room. I do have that open. With that being said, let's get into tonight's broadcast, and we'll be back to talk a little bit more after the special airs.
On Islam, geopolitical, national security, and immigration issues. And I would love for you to look at his blog sometime, View from the Right. You can find it at http://anation, amnation, thank you, .com. He will speak on macro issues, and then Andrew will speak on more theological issues. When Andrew comes up, he is a theological expert. He's getting his master's. He speaks several languages, including ancient Arabic, and he's going to show us in the text what's really there. Okay, thank you so much.
All right, should we stand here?
Yeah, whatever you want.
Hello? Hello. See you. Thank you, Barbara. First of all, it's not correct to call me an expert on Islam. I am not. One does not need to be an expert on Islam to know enough about it, to know what a serious problem it is. I heard Wafa Sultan speak a few weeks ago in New York, and she said something about you need to know Arabic to understand the Islam problem. But I said to her, well, if that's the case, how is it that we have all these Islam critics in America who understand the problem? We don't know Arabic. So you don't need to be an expert. You do need to know the fundamental principles, the fundamental commandments and teachings, something about the history of Islam. For that, you don't need to be an expert. All of us have picked up enough of this knowledge just from reading the blogs. We all know what they are, and educating ourselves that way. Now, what I'm going to talk about tonight, 3 points I'm going to be approaching. What is the reality of Islam? Why do we deny the reality of Islam? And if we stopped denying the reality of Islam, what would we do? Now, last week, a report was issued about the jihad massacre at Fort Hood in Texas. Probably most of you know, it's been written about pretty widely, that this 86-page report on why this openly jihadist, pro-terrorist, anti-American major in the U.S. Army, not only was allowed to remain in the Army so that he could kill people, but that the report does not use the words Islam, Muslim, jihad, and as I just learned yesterday from Time magazine, I haven't read the report yet myself, it doesn't even mention his name, Nidal Hassan. So this is getting to a very, very extreme place. We are, as Barbara said, constructing, I would say, the ruling powers that be, the liberal powers that be in society with the Muslims, have constructed a false reality. And that false reality has gained power over us. There have been many such false realities in modern science. In fact, modernity, to a large extent, is almost a history of these false realities. Communism, Nazism, fascism, all kinds of extreme liberal beliefs, multiculturalism, and every one of these things has gained power over people's mind, has caused terrible damage, and ultimately people realize that it's false and start to reject it. So what we have to do, what everyone has to do, is assert the truth against this falsity. Now, the first problem that comes up is when conservatives see something like the cover-up of the jihad Islamic nature of the Fort Hood massacre. They say, well, political correctness is getting worse and worse, and it certainly is. The problem is, or part of the problem is, it's not only liberals that are engaged in that cover-up. Conservatives are engaged in it too. They also refrain from speaking frankly about the nature of the problem. They also don't want to use the word Islam. And what we have in America today is that in mainstream society, mainstream right, mainstream left, there are two views of Islam that are permitted. The left view is that Islam is a wonderful religion, and that if there's anything that seems bad about Islam or troublesome, such as terrorism, that's purely a response to something bad that we have done. So Islam is perfectly good. Anything bad about it is due to us. The conservative view of Islam is that Islam is a wonderful religion, except for one little part of Islam, which is a problem, which is extreme. And that's called Islamism or Islamofascism. And the conservatives use these terms and are very proud of the fact that they're not politically correct, because unlike the left, they don't cover up they don't refrain from using the real name for our enemy. They know that the name of our enemy is Islamism and Islamofascism. So, of course, the conservatives are much closer to the truth. They recognize that there is something about Islam which threatens us. But because they will not speak frankly about it themselves, they look. And when the leading conservative Islam writers and Islam critics are constantly telling conservative readers that Islam or Islamic extremism is a terrible problem, but then say that the solution to this terrible problem is that we have to reach out to moderate Muslims because they're the solution. That has such a confusing effect. That message it puts people one direction, then puts them in another. Oh yeah, I'm supposed to be all scared and all riled up about the Islam problem, but then I'm being told that no, Muslims are really the answer. So there's really nothing left for us to do except to reach out to the moderate Muslims and hope that somehow they are going to change Islam. Well, I've talked about the false beliefs that characterize the modern world, these fantasy worlds that people live in. The belief in moderate Islam, the belief that moderate Islam is the solution to radical Islam, is just as much a false reality, a false, constructed, Gnostic distortion of reality that the other realities I've mentioned. Because the problem is Islam itself. And anybody who declines to say that is confusing and muddling the waters. Now, one of the ways that Western intellectuals of both the right and the left deal with the attempt to understand Islam is or rather how they avoid dealing with Islam, is that they have a variety of theories of what causes Islamic extremism. And I call these theories non-Islam theories of Islamic extremism. There's many of them. I have a collection of about 25 so far. You can read my website. And they just cover the gamut. Basically, every issue which for the particular intellectual is his favorite issue will be the thing that he says is the cause of Islamic extremism. So if there's somebody who, a liberal, who feels that what's wrong with America is that we're so ungenerous and oppressive towards the third world, we don't give them enough aid and enough money, well, that person will think that Islamic extremism is caused by the fact that we don't give enough aid and money to Muslims. Somebody who is very involved in the issue of assimilation will say that, well, Islamic extremism comes about because we haven't tried hard enough to assimilate the Muslims. Another view, people that are focused on sex, say that the reason for Islamic extremism is that young Muslim men are sexually frustrated. And this is what drives them to jihad acts of murder. And, now Nidal Hassan seems to be a bachelor and was lonely, and, there's some plausible basis for that. But then you have people on the right as well as the left, the Darwinians, who were very much into the biological level of reality. They want to explain everything in biological terms, so they'll say that the reason that jihad exists is sexual frustration. Another theory, Steve Saylor has pushed this, is that Islamic extremism exists because of cousin marriage within the Islamic world. Well, that's certainly a factor in the tribalism and other negative factors of those societies. But even if there was not cousin marriage, Islam would still be Islam. Some other non-Islam theories of Islamic extremism. I'll just read them all quickly. Modernity produces alienation. Muslims become disoriented from living in Western society, which is so different from the society that they're familiar with. So they become the suicide bombers. Other immigrants do not become suicide bombers, but why the Muslims? Then there's the Bernard Lewis and Daniel Pipes theory, also, which is that Muslims are angry and aggressive because they feel inferior because they were left behind by the West. They were once a glorious civilization. They were once threatening the West. For the last 300 years, they've been very weak. They've been left behind, so they're angry. Pipes also wrote a column a couple of years ago in which he suggested that since being left behind is the reason that Muslims are angry, I forget if he said this or if he just implied it, but the clear implication was that, well, we need to help the Muslims feel good about themselves again. Let's empower Islam. Let's return Islam to the way it was in the 15th century, or the 12th, or the 9th. I mean, this is the kind of nutty, escapist theories that people come up with when they refuse to face the simple reality that Islam is Islam. Let's see if there were any others. Dinesh D'Souza said that Lawrence Auster is the cause of Islamic extremism, because by arguing that the problem is Islam, people like me who say that make Muslims angry, and therefore they start committing jihad. So,
Viva la
That's a heavy weight, Lord.
So the truth is that Islam is the source of Islamic extremism, and I'm not going to go into detail on that. I think Andrew will be discussing that in more depth. But I just want to approach one aspect of this that I think can capture the essence of what Islam is. I'm not a scholar of Islam, but I've read a fair amount of the Quran. You dive into it, you start to get a feel for it. And there is, and I've experienced this, the highest truth of Islam is the closeness to God, to Allah, not God, Allah, because Allah is not God. The closeness to Allah that the Muslim experiences when he is waging war for Allah, when he is killing and dying for Allah. This is the ultimate religious experience for the Muslim. And it's a very strange thing. Islam is a religion. Nobody can deny that it is a religion. But it is a most peculiar religion in that the heart and core of this religion is war waged against the dehumanized non-Muslim who must be subdued and crushed in order to bring about the goal, which is Islamic rule over the world. And this is why these texts have such a power. I have felt it myself at times reading these, not personally, but I could sympathetically identify with how a Muslim reacts to these words, these powerful texts. O Muslim, O follower of Allah, wage war against the Christian and the Jew until they have paid the jizya tax and feel themselves subdued. And in the last day, even the rocks and the stones will say, O Muslim, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him. These words have an emotional effect on the inner life of any Muslim who comes under its influence. And again, the majority of Muslims are not jihadists. Most of them aren't even necessarily aware of that aspect of Islam. But it's there, and it's the core of Islam, just as communism is the core of communism. An analogy I made recently was that a way to understand the Islam problem is that if Islam is a nation, and they think of themselves as a nation, well, the jihadists are the soldiers of this nation, and the regular members are the civilians. So it's a way of sort of picturing it. Yeah, the civilians are not on the battlefield; they're not waging war, but they are still part of the nation in whose name and on whose behalf the warriors are waging war. There is no mystery about the history of Islam. Throughout the history of for the last 1,400 years, for 1,000 years, Western Europe, Eastern Europe were under siege of the active jihad warriors. I'm not going to go into detail of those hundreds of years of wars and raids and capturing of people for slavery and the invasion of Gaul and the invasion of Austria and all the rest of it. But the West was extremely conscious for 1,000 years of the threat that it faced from Islam. How can it be that only 300 years after the last serious Islamic threat to Europe, which was in the late 17th century, just 1690, a little over 300 years ago, when the Muslims were driven back from Vienna, there's been a complete forgetfulness. It's as though that 1,000 years never happened. So, again, this is why it's silly to act as though somebody needs to be a special scholar of Islam in order to understand the nature of the problem. All of us can understand the nature of the problem. Any common sense person with some basic knowledge of the world can understand the nature of Islam. Just as we understood the threat of Nazism. As I said, did people need to be scholars of Nazism in World War II to recognize what a danger it was? Did people need to be scholars of communism to know what a danger it was? Of course not. But we deny it. Why do we deny it? Why do we deny the obvious? And here we come. I've talked about false realities. In my view, the main false belief that governs our society is, I call it liberalism. And the guiding principle of liberalism is that discrimination is the greatest sin. Must be avoided. Discrimination must be eliminated. The underlying idea is that basically all people are the same. All people are basically like us, despite superficial differences. And therefore, any discrimination is just wrong. This belief has dominated America and Europe since the end of World War II. It was, to a certain extent, it was a reaction against Nazism. We sort of, seeing the horrors of Nazism, the Western world went to this opposite extreme of liberalism and saying that any intolerance is the moral equivalent of Nazism. Any discrimination is the moral equivalent of Nazism. And I've told this story, and I'll tell it again. That belief has gone so far that a couple of years ago at a small meeting where I was talking about the need to restrict Muslim immigration, a man present who was the editor of a leading conservative magazine said, if we stopped Muslim immigration, we would be as immoral as the terrorists. That's the editor of a well-known conservative magazine. So it's not just nominal liberals that believe in this liberal ideology and are guided by it. It's many conservatives as well. The strangeness of our current situation is suggested by the fact. Let me try this hypothetical. 70 years ago, if somebody had suggested, let's start admitting mass immigration of Muslims into the West, would there have been anybody who would have entertained it? Of course not. Everybody in the West would have understood that Muslims are very different from us. There's this historical war between Islam and the West. Their religion, their Sharia way of life is utterly antithetical to ours. Of course we're not going to let them in. Yet today, nobody even suggests reducing, let alone stopping, Muslim immigration into the West. Even the most outspoken Islam critics never talk about reducing or stopping Muslim immigration. That's how far we have reversed. That's how far inside the liberal mindset we have become. So, just as we got into this craziness, by embracing this liberal view of reality, we have to get out of it. The only way to get out of it is by speaking the truth, identifying the falseness of this liberal belief, and moving to a different situation where the truth about Islam can be spoken, where we can say, these people really are sort of an enemy army. They really do not belong among us. And we have to start finding ways to reverse this Islamization of the West. And that is why also ACT, as Barbara was describing some of the activities of ACT for America, all these are necessary and good things, and I feel I want to get involved in some of them myself.
Hope so.
But any activism which tries to deal with the symptoms of the problem, but accepts the existence of the problem itself, is ultimately, in my view, a losing game. If we accept the presence of Islam in the West, we're just going to be foot dragging as they gain more and more power. The only solution, in my view, and I'm stating it very frankly, and I've been saying this for many years, Muslims in large numbers do not belong in any Western society. It was a mistake to let them in, and now we have to recognize that mistake and find ways to start reversing that immigration.
How?
All right? We start first. Now, let me just preface this by saying, I know that what I'm saying is completely impossible in the political society in which we now exist. I'm not a fantasist. I know that what I'm saying cannot be now, or next year, or in 5 years. In order for the things that I am proposing to have any possibility of coming into effect, we, America, to a large extent, would already have to have had moved away from that liberal belief that everybody's really the same and that discrimination is the most terrible sin. A change in mind, a change in thought will have to have occurred. So that's the reality that we have to move toward. Once that has happened, once Americans have become a people who are willing and ready to face the truth, then, and I'm not saying that we should hold off any efforts until some future, I'm saying we should push for it now. All Muslim immigration to America and to other Western countries as well must be stopped. And let me add also, ultimately this will not be effective unless all the countries of the West, and really non-Muslim countries as well, join together. But let's just speak about America in this context. Any exponents or believers in Sharia who are certainly those who are resident aliens and not citizens should be removed, as Geert Wilders himself has said. Any naturalized citizens. Also, anybody to become a citizen should have to take an oath that he renounces anything to do with Sharia. If he breaks it, he loses his citizenship. Muslim mosques and institutions that have anything to do with pushing Sharia and jihad must be closed. Now, when we say that Sharia is a disqualifier for American citizenship, now, Sharia really, it's not a small minority. Any serious Muslim, any believing Muslim, believes in Sharia. The Islamic law is essentially identical to Islam. Wherever Muslims are, they put the Islamic law into effect. When they are the minority, when they are an immigrant group, they start putting it into effect for their own community. They try to have Sharia courts for marriage and property and things like that. But then as they gain more power, they start to extend the reach of Sharia law more and more, and they get the surrounding society to conform to it. Moves like this, and also another thing is I think that we should propose that tell the Muslim population, we will give you a certain amount of money, say $50,000, if you leave the United States and give up any claim to ever return. So it's a combination. It's a combination of forceful measures in some cases, carrot, stick in some measures, carrot in others, and the hope is that as the society becomes more restrictive and frankly hostile to Islam, that Muslims will start to leave on their own. Because Muslims generally come where they're welcome. What was the initial act that marks the beginning of the Islamic calendar? It was when Muhammad and his 150 followers migrated, they were immigrants, into Medina. The Medinans welcomed them, and within a couple of years, that's when Muhammad began to gain political power and became the ruler, the dictator of Medina. That's the beginning of Islam. So, immigration into a non-Muslim society is the archetypal act by which Islam spreads. But if a society does not welcome Muslims, they tend not to go there. So the hope is that the Muslims would begin to leave voluntarily. What if they didn't? What if then further measures might be necessary? Another problem is that the left we have the U.S. Constitution, the First Amendment is a major problem. Congress shall make no law infringing the freedom of religion. Well, ultimately it may be necessary, and I have advocated this, to have a constitutional amendment which prohibits the practice of Islam in the United States. And that sounds very radical. But what is the Constitution for? It's to define the basic principles that define us as a society. The 13th Amendment banned slavery because society became to believe that slavery is fundamentally incompatible with the kind of country that we are. Well, the slavery of Islam is also fundamentally incompatible with the kind of society we are. So, and then one more thing, then beyond the immediate question of how do we start moving Islam out of America and out of the West, it is hoped, my larger strategy, which I call separationism, is to quarantine Muslims within the historic Muslim lands. I don't see any other solution. There are people on the blogosphere who are more extreme than I, who want to kill all Muslims in the world and stuff like that. I think that all we have to do is reverse the situation, tell the Muslims in the West this really doesn't work. You've got to go, and basically confine Islam to the Islamic part of the world. If we did that, I think that the West would have been saved. So I will leave it there and open it up to. Should we have questions now, or is Andrew going to speak?
I think it might be nice for both of you to be up at the end and take questions. Answer them together separately.
Okay.
Whatever anyone.
Larry, I just wanted to thank you for your informative approach to dealing with Islam, as well as sharing your experiences within the context of your work with Islam. I'm going to approach this issue of Islam and the situation with Islam in the West today from a slightly different perspective, and that's through the window of theology. The question is, what is theology first? Theology comes from two Greek words, theos and logos, meaning respectively God and wisdom, logic, or knowledge. So when we speak about theology, we're talking about the knowledge, understanding, and comprehension of the divine based upon key assumptions. And now when I say assumption here, I use this word because all religion, whether it's Islam, Christianity, Judaism, whatever, when reduced to its elemental mass, is based upon assumption. And we know this better as faith. Faith is a simple trust, an assumed belief that is believed as is. And it's from that simple assumption that an entire worldview, a philosophy, and eventually a religion emerges. The simple assumptions that constitute faith are called dogma. Now, a dogma is a fixed truth or assumption that never changes and is absolute in its nature. And it can often be expressed as a simple yes or no type question. For instance, the statements, there is a God, versus the statements, there is no God. Now, whether you believe in God or not, it does not matter, because there is no middle position in this. You either believe in God, or you do not believe in God, because God cannot exist and not exist at the same time. And I want to emphasize that both of these examples are examples of dogma because they are assumed or believed in faith. And this is the heart of theology. Theology deals with dogma, and it deals with the identification, understanding of these dogmas, their assumptions, and their implications for how they form our worldviews. And I'm explaining this to you because this is the problem that we are facing today between Islam and the West, as well as within the heart of Islam itself. We are not witnessing what some have called radicalism, Islamofascism, or extremism, but something that is far more dangerous. We are witnessing the public manifestation, fulfillment, and fruition of orthodox Islamic theology. It's more accurately called fundamentalism because the term fundamentalism was originally used in around 1912 to describe a series of evangelical American Protestant essays that attempted to outline the fundamentals, or the basics, of Protestant Christianity. And I say this because in the same way, Muslims who commit acts of terrorism are not extremists, radicals, or political fascists, but their acts flow out of their obedience to orthodox Islamic teaching and dogma, and then, as I mentioned earlier, which is grounded in the very dogmatic building blocks of the Islamic religion. For this reason, Orthodox Islam cannot and will never be reformed because it is impossible to change that which, according to Islam, is unchanging, divinely revealed truth, dogma. And these dogmas are what give justification, inspiration, and encouragement to acts such as the killing of apostates, jihad, and the abuse of non-Muslims, particularly in our context, Christians and Jews. And these acts are inseparable from Islamic theological dogma, and to partially or to wholly renounce them means, from a theological perspective to partially or wholly renounce Islam. And before I continue, I want to emphasize this point to you very carefully. And that is that this does not mean that all Muslims believe in, would engage in, or would even support the killing of apostates, abuse of non-Muslims, or jihad. However, once again, an individual person or people's opinions do not reflect Orthodox Islamic teaching. Use an example from the Catholic faith. Orthodox Christian teaching has always and vehemently opposed abortion. However, there are many Catholics who support abortion. Those Catholics who in their own personal beliefs support abortion do not reflect Orthodox Catholic teaching, and in this regard, their personal beliefs are in opposition to the Catholic faith they claim to espouse. Likewise, following this same example, there are Muslims who do not believe in, would renounce or have renounced, and do or have opposed jihad, apostasy, killing, and abuse of non-Muslims. And I want to say that I encourage and I support such people. This is a very good thing that these people do not believe in these things. However, the problem is, from the perspective of Orthodox Islamic theology, their personal beliefs in this regard are in opposition to the faith which they claim to espouse. And technically, that is the theological definition of heresy, which is to oppose aspects of what one claims to believe. Therefore, it's easy to see why it's very difficult to find pious, learned Muslims who honestly and earnestly oppose these acts. And the reasons are severalfold. First, it would cause them to fall into heresy. Second, they would be ostracized by the fellow Muslim communities until they repented of their heresy because they're heretics. Third, they would receive condemnation from fellow imams and muftis. Muftis are people who give fatwas or decrees on Islamic law. Fourth, they could be killed because if the Muslim community or a Muslim juror found that this person's heresy had led him to apostasy, which is the active opposition or abandonment of religion, in this case Islam, then they would warrant the penalty that is mandated by Orthodox Islamic teaching for heretics, which is مَنْ يُبَدَّلُ دِينُهُ لِغَيْرُ مِنَ الْإِسْلَامِ فَاقْتَلَهُ. Whoever changes his religion to one other than Islam, kill him. For this reason, now, I want to return to these three major issues I've been talking about, which is, again, jihad, the killing of apostates, and the abuse of non-Muslims. And I want to show how theology brings all these issues together in one question that is a simple yes or no. And that is man's human dignity something that is intrinsic to its creation? You see, in Islamic theological dogma, it teaches that man is created with dignity, human dignity, but it is within the context of obedience to Islam. The exact position is reflected in the hadith saying, وُلِدَتْ كُلُّ أَوْلَادْ مُسْلِمًا لَكِنَّ يَعْلُ وَلَدَيْهُ يَهُودًا نُصَارًا وَمُشْرِكًا. Every child is born as a Muslim, but his parents make him a Jew, a Christian, or a pagan. And it's also reflected very clearly in the Quranic statement, خَلَقَنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِأَحْسَنِ التَّقْوِيمِ فَرَدَدْنَاهُ إِلَى أَسْفَلِ السَّافِلِينَ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمَلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ فَلَهُمْ أَجْرَاءُ غَيْرُ مَمْنُونٍ. We have created man in the best of molds. Then do we abase him to the lowest of the low, except for those who believe and do righteous deeds, for they shall have a reward unfailing. Now there are many other passages of the Quran and the Hadith that speak about what I'm about to say, but these are two primary examples of this. Where I'm going with this is, in Islam, the theological understanding is, dogmatically, if you are a human being, you are created with full human dignity by your creation and birth as a human. However, your dignity exists within the confines of obedience to Islam. You are free to leave Islam. That is a choice of your free will. However, in so doing, with that you abandon your human dignity. Thus, the rights and human dignity that endow you with your humanity are conditional upon your acceptance of and obedience to Islam. This is theologically speaking. And we can contrast this with the words from the biblical book of Genesis, chapter 1, verse 26. Which states that man is created in the image and likeness of God. And I mention this because whether we are Christians or Jews, or we do not believe in any religion, our Western heritage is founded in many ways on Judeo-Christian thought as well as Greco-Roman thought. So to that extent, in Christianity and Judaism, they both teach that man's human dignity is something that is intrinsic to him. It's an inherent part of his creation that is inseparable from him and always remains with him. The differences that we can see between the Jewish Christian yes versus the Islamic no answer to the question, is man's human dignity something intrinsic to his creation, is profound. The Christian and Jewish position establishes that every person is inherently human by his creation and always remains as such. So all men have rights and are to be treated fairly, justly, and equally, because each man reflects God in his individual, personal, created existence. On the contrary, Islam establishes that man is indeed created with human dignity, but because human dignity remains with man only when he is an obedient Muslim, it is required only that Muslims receive human rights, justice, dignity, and respect because they possess full humanity. Since non-Muslims willfully and consciously reject Islam and with that their human dignity, they do not possess full humanity and can or have the potential to be treated in a subhuman manner. Now, I want to emphasize here again, it's not required by Islamic theology that non-Muslims or even Muslim apostates be treated in an undignified subhuman manner. And it is perfectly possible, in theory, that non-Muslims be treated in the same manner as a faithful Muslim. Once again, however, this is in theory. Because of the fact that Islam, as a religion, refuses to recognize the dignity of non-Muslims, it opens up for the possibility and for the permissibility for mistreatment without any kind of barrier to prohibit this. So, therefore, while Muslims are not required to do these things to non-Muslims, neither are they required to treat them with the respect and dignity due to a fellow Muslim. And that is a very important and fine distinction. I want to give an example of this. There was a problem, I think it was in the year 2008, when this exact theological issue came to an international scene. When there was a sheikh from Australia who said, regarding women who do not wear the hijab, a Muslim or not, they are, quote, uncovered meat who are asking to be raped. Now, the reason why he said this is because non-Muslims, as well as disobedient, and by that I mean heretical or apostate Muslims, have rejected Islam, and with that, as I've said, their human dignity, as taught by Islamic theology. In this case, the sheikh was saying, in honest and faithful concordance with Orthodox Islamic theology, that if such a woman is raped, she is the one who is at fault, because by her choice to reject Islam and subsequently her own human dignity, she has abandoned the protections that a human being possesses, and therefore, if something happens, it is not happening to a person. The real danger of this example, as I've emphasized, is not rape, but it's the fact that, as illustrated through this, Islamic theology treats human dignity as though it were a license. It can be taken away if the conditions, in the case of Islam, not being Muslim, are not followed. And for this reason, it's oftentimes why people draw the parallel between Islam and fascism, Nazism, or totalitarianism. Because within these political systems, men are given the right to deem other men's lives as worthy or unworthy of existence. But there is a difference. These are political systems. And there is nothing political about Islam, because while Islam has a political system within it, these political systems, fascism, Nazism, totalitarianism, communism, etc., they are not believed to be divinely revealed. And they do not have positions that are unchanging. Islam, on the other hand, is based out of, as I mentioned, what is believed to be eternal, revealed truths, dogmatic truths. And these cannot change, theologically speaking. Following this example, I'd like to say that before a Muslim can wage jihad, mistreat a non-Muslim, or kill an apostate, the non-Muslim must be given the chance, or at least should be given the chance to convert to Islam. And the reason is simple. It's because, as I mentioned, human dignity is connected to being a Muslim and obedience to Islam. Therefore, the person should be given a chance to regain his humanity by reversion or reacceptance of Islam. I say this word reversion because you'll hear Muslims, especially Muslim missionaries, use this term frequently. Because remember, if you are all created as Muslims, then by your leaving Islam, by being a Christian, a Jew, a pagan, atheist, fill in the blank, then by your believing in that, you have cast off your dignity. So when you revert to Islam, you are re-accepting that which you rejected, that which was taken away from you if you were raised as a Christian or a Jew or whatever. So the idea of reversion is very common in Islam, and you will hear this term mentioned a lot. This is why I use this word. However, if the person refuses to become a Muslim, he can be treated as one wills because he is no longer a human being, and he has rejected a chance to regain his dignity. Under Islamic law, this would be classified as what is called maqbool, and this is a reflection of Muhammad, which means acceptable. And this is a reflection of Muhammad's statement, لا ضرار ولا ضرور, neither harmful nor helpful, meaning an action is not mandatory, but there is no sin involved if one chooses to do it. It's not mandatory to engage in jihad. It's not mandatory to kill apostates. It is not mandatory to mistreat non-Muslims. However, the potential exists to do it. There are no barriers for any potential moral quandaries, and it is not a sin if one chooses to do it. Remember, it's neither harmful nor helpful. لا ضرار ولا ضرور, because it is considered under Islamic law acceptable, maqbool. And an excellent example you can see in our own times today of this is if you ever watch a terrorist video, such as those that Mr. Bin Laden puts out, or that other terrorists, such as Mr. Adam Gadad has put out. If you ever carefully watch them, you will notice that they almost always extend an offer for you, the viewer, to accept or revert to Islam. And the reason why they do this is several-fold. First, they're making you, the viewer, aware that according to Islam, you have done something that has put you in opposition, in theological opposition. Second, they are warning you of the consequences for people who oppose Islam and refuse to become Muslims. Obstinately refuse. Finally, they're allowing you a chance to regain your humanity by reversion, that word again, to Islam. Theologically speaking, a person who converts to Islam is inviolable. They're haram. They have become sacred because that person has full human dignity and must be treated as any other Muslim. Even if you were in a battlefield, in a war situation, Muhammad uses this example many times throughout the hadith. If a person is in physical battle with another Muslim, and he's a non-Muslim, and he says, I convert to Islam, I cease, that person becomes inviolable. No matter what he has done before, all of his errors, all of the whatever fighting he engaged in, he must be treated as a fellow Muslim because he has now accepted his full human dignity. And in Islam, it is a sin to kill another Muslim. It is a grave sin. It's a sin that lands a person directly into hell, theologically speaking. So therefore, if you refuse to convert, and then if a person decides to do something, theologically speaking, it's not his fault what happens to you, but it's your fault. And the reason why is just using, as mentioned in the rape example, you refuse the chance to re-accept your human dignity by conversion to Islam. What happens to you after that is your problem. And this can also be reflected in early Islamic history through Muhammad's treatment of non-Muslims, particularly the Jewish people. And remember, because practicing Jews, as well as Christians, are not Muslims, they have willfully rejected Islam and are subhuman. And during Muhammad's lifetime, this and his other anti-Jewish attitudes began after the tribes of Arabia, the Qaynuqa, Qurayza, and the Nadir, refused to convert to Islam. And Muhammad used their opposition to his military raids against their tribes on this basis to wage jihad against them and eventually exterminate them from most of the Arabian Peninsula. And I meant to mention here, I have a binder here of several quotes. Oh, I didn't realize that. I have a binder here of several quotes of Muhammad's sayings concerning Jewish people as well as Christians. I encourage all of you to look through this. I also encourage all of you to look through some of the classical sources of Islamic theology that I brought. I brought what's called Sahih Bukhari, which is a very well-known, highly respected work of what's called hadith, or Islamic tradition. And it's from this that we can derive much of our theological understanding. It helps us to interpret the Quran, which is the holy book of Islam. But continuing on, for centuries, Jewish and Christian peoples have lived in Islamic societies, but their conduct has been governed by a lack of recognition of true humanity and, as a result, citizenship in society. Now, it is very true and well documented that there are many times in history that Jews and Christians lived in peace and great harmony with Muslims and in Muslim governments. However, despite this, it has never changed the fact that aside from the situation, their political and social situation depending upon the ruler in power, it has not endowed them with the same human dignity because according to Orthodox Islamic teaching, they still lack that unless they convert to Islam. As a result, there is no political, educational, economic, or law enforcement solution that can resolve the situation with Islam and terrorism because the issues are theological in nature. They stem from the most foundational building blocks of Islamic dogma that constitute the core of Islam itself. The theology is a manifestation of these dogma. And to change the dogma would mean to change the theology. And that would lead to, as Waqf Sultan has pointed out, to create an entirely new religion, yet call it by the name of Islam. Islam cannot be theologically reformed. It's an oxymoron to say it can be changed without altering the core theology. However, as with all religions, Islam's influence, especially in the West, depends upon two components. First, it extends as far as people are willing to believe, accept, and implement its teachings on faith. Second, it necessitates a critical mass of people who are willing to follow and believe in Islam. And likewise, we can look at these two issues as representing two aspects in developing a long-term answer to the situation of Islam. First, the issue of belief. Islam must be addressed through an aggressive campaign that targets core issues of Islamic theology. People, Muslim or not, must be continually exposed to theological questioning about Islam, and with that, people must be shown alternatives to Islam. And this is part of a gradual process of intellectual inquiry and change, conversion. It must be forward-looking in that instead of positing this as a defense of the West against Islam, as I've heard many people say, the West must be presented as a solution to the problems which stem out from Islam. In other words, we cannot any longer adapt a defensive posture in this situation. We must take a proactive, assertive view that begins by asserting our common Western heritage, which includes both our religious Judeo-Christian and our cultural Greco-Roman aspects, and then addressing Islam from this point. We must identify first and present a viable, consistent solution if we are to address Islam successfully. Because remember, Islam presents itself as a complete way of life, as one that answers religious questions, one that answers social questions, one that answers economic questions. So likewise, if we are to address Islam, we must be able to meet the questions that will be posed to us, and we must be able to do it in a succinct, clear, consistent manner. The second issue pertains more to non-Muslims, and this is the issue of followers. The non-Muslims in the West must be encouraged to have strong, bountiful families. I know Larry mentioned earlier the issues regarding immigration. One of the biggest problems that few people are willing to talk about with immigration is it started not just after World War II because of people who died, but because of two primary issues: families not having children and abortion. Those are the two hard issues that few people are willing to talk about. As a result, we in the West must maintain our families by encouraging non-Muslims, particularly Christians and Jews, to engage in behaviors such as marriage and bountiful families, while discourage behaviors that are culturally and civilizationally suicidal, such as I mentioned, divorce, abortion, and concubinage. To this extent, I want to add that the long-term struggle with Islam will not be won by great wars, battles, legislation, or politics. It will be won little by little, through individual people living average lives that will result in a gradual transformation of society. And we may not see results for 5, 10, or 20 years. But if implemented, the results will inevitably come, and they will last for centuries, because as Islam is attempting to do now, they will form the foundation for our society's future identity, both culturally and in terms of physical human people. As one highly respected imam I heard say, when he was asked about the Islamization of American society, he said, quote, "We must stop thinking about conquering the USA in 2 or 3 generations." These are his words. We must be thinking about how we want this country to look in 20 or 30 generations from now and shape our future from here. So to this extent, I'm going to say there is much hope, but we cannot place our hopes in dreams in trying to reform unreformable Islamic theology, in legislation, or in anti-terrorism efforts, although these are all very important aspects. Islam will cease influence and people cease believing in it, and they propagate this through influencing those around them and passing it through their families. And I want to thank you all for listening to me.
So what we'd like to do is open it up to questions now. Go ahead.
I had 3 few little items I want to throw out to you and get your reactions to. Number one.
She asked that the constitutional amendment would be getting judges to oppose the institutionalization of Sharia. And my answer is that as long as Muslims are present in this society and gaining numbers and gaining power, then we are consigning ourselves to an eternal struggle, an eternal and internal struggle in this within America against a constant pressure of Islam. So I don't think that's just a recipe for a situation in which Islam is going to become ever stronger, and we have to maintain a constant resistance against it, which also another element of this that I didn't mention in my opening speech on the question of terrorism. Just as so long as Muslims are present and growing in America, we would have to maintain a constant political war to try to keep Sharia from spreading. In the same way, as long as Muslims are present in large numbers in America and other Western countries, we have to maintain this anti-terror regime forever. We have to be taking off our shoes in airports forever. We have to be careful going through this humiliating and depressing process every time we fly in an airplane forever. We have to have Pennsylvania Avenue looking like a war zone forever. Why? Because, and nobody ever thinks this through, because there are Muslims present in our society and traveling freely in the West. So the only solution for both of those things, I think, is the removal of Muslims from the West.
I'd like to comment on this. One thing that I think this might help with your question. One of the things I've tried to consistently emphasize is that the problem with Islam, it's not an issue of moderate Muslims or radical Muslims. It's a matter of orthodox theology. And the problems within Islam, these stem out of orthodox theological belief. Now, you have Muslims who will not believe in the tenets of their religion, as I mentioned earlier. However, the fact is, you may claim to believe in a religion, but just because you believe it doesn't mean you're following it to its full capacity and to the teachings that it prescribes. What I'm saying is, orthodox theology teaches these things, and for many Muslims who are well-intentioned, faithful, and pious, they end up doing these things, or at least coming to a point where they support or where they will not deny support for them because they are so intrinsic to their religious belief, that to, not their personal belief, but to the belief of Islam itself, that to deny them, it would entail apostasy, or at the very least heresy upon them. And heresy, the punishment for Muslims in the afterlife is torment in the lowest parts of hell. In this life, it's ostracism up to and including death, execution.
Can I ask what is the how does heresy on the part of a Muslim come into effect in response to that question? Well, so how would a Muslim get into a heresy in that situation?
Denying an aspect of Islam, denying the killing of apostates. For instance, you can deny that, but that's heretical in Orthodox theology. It's from a theological perspective. If I'm striving to be a faithful Muslim.
Oh, I see. What you're saying is, if America prevented Muslims from practicing Sharia, and the Muslims accepted that, those Muslims would be heretics.
Heresy.
Well, fine.
Muslims should not immigrate to non-Muslim societies, except, with the exception, they are attempting to bring Islam, essentially enlightenment, as he would say, into these societies. I'm sure you've heard of the concept, the House of Islam and House of War. This was coined in the 14th century by the Muslim theologian Ibn Taymiyyah. And the idea is that the House of Islam, the land and the peoples of Islam, the people who are the Din al-Haq, the religion of truth, and the religion that comes from Allah, as Islam teaches, will eventually assimilate all of the non-Muslims, the house of war, the Dar al-Harb. It's a matter of time when it happens. So in this case, yes, they are permitted, but it's within a theological context of expansionism. Qiyya is a concept that basically means lying for Allah. In other words, it's based in several passages in the Quran where it says that non-Muslims, or Muslims are not supposed to take non-Muslims as awliya, usually translated as friends, but it can also mean protectors, it can mean guardians, it can mean associates, really. So the concept here is that if I am a Muslim and I suspect that by my speech I might endanger myself or other Muslims, or if it's being done for the spread and propagation of Islam, I am allowed to lie to you, and it's not a sin. Once again, it's considered maqbool. It's perfectly acceptable. And Muslims have often used this, I think more often against other Muslims. Usually Shias use it against Sunnis, and Sunnis use it against Shias historically, but we're seeing a lot of that now today in the West, because, once again, for the purpose of expanding Islam, and the purpose of mostly doing what's called da'wah, or missionary work. So, in other words, it's perfectly okay for me if I'm evangelizing you, as an instance, to Islam, to lie to you, but once you convert, remember, you cannot leave.
Qiyya is okay. Then they will lie. How can you harass them?
As far as the methods by which this is determined, the overall purpose is, for example, some Muslims come right out and indicate what they're about, what they believe in. Not all Muslims practice taqiyya. There seems to be two modes. Sometimes they are very eager to tell the world what they believe. Others practice taqiyya. And I'm sure both those options are in the Islamic law. Everything they do it's the greatest book of strategy ever written. But my overall object is not to say, oh, we're just going to remove the troublesome ones and the rest if they promise not to. No. The object is, recognize this is radical, but I think only radical steps in the long run will help us, is to reduce Muslim populations in America down to a small fraction of what they are now, and then they really will not be able to manifest any kind of serious Islam. They will not be a threat at that point.
And I should like to emphasize, as a quick side to that, you mentioned how do you tell if someone's lying or not. That's a serious problem. And that's about all I can say about that.
Bob Weisberg.
Let me ask you, pose a far simpler solution than what you have suggested, but may actually come out the same way, which is the Americanization of Islam. Now, we do know that, and you find...
The solution, you're speaking of finding basically a nominal Islam.
Yeah,
and some people believe in that. But how do we bring that about? If you read, I've criticized Daniel Pipes, but here he's the source of information on what these, or he's the main source of information on what these Muslim American groups are up to. They're not getting Americanized. They're getting stronger. They have a 100-year-long strategy. So you want to cut off the Saudi influence in the hope that the Muslims will then Americanize.
Well, that's what France is trying to do.
I can comment on this. I'm going to translate what you're saying. What you're saying is basically sow heresy.
Yeah,
pretty much is what that means.
Of course.
And I can tell you that when it comes to dealing with religion, any religion, there is always a tendency to revert to orthodoxy. Because when you have many different interpretations, this was one of the problems that happened in Christianity during the 4th century. There were many different interpretations about the divinity of Jesus. And the Orthodox position has always been that Jesus is God, He's divine. So what happened? They had a council, and Orthodoxy was formally defined in formal doctrinal terms, although the dogma had always been there. And the heresy, which was called Arianism, eventually disappeared. In Islam, they've had Reformation movements like this during the Middle Ages. What happened to them? They all died out. And for the same reason, whether it's in Christianity, whether it's in Judaism, Islam, name your religion, when you have a defined orthodox dogma and you start having heretical divisions, eventually it will work for a time. The people will come to a point and they will say, as Pontius Pilate said in the New Testament, Quia veritas, what is truth? And they will speak cultures.
All over Europe you have religion that is on its last legs. The only people in churches are older women and tourists. And to suggest somehow that there's an inner vitalism in religion, this sort of innate orthodoxy which emerges, is irrepressible, is belied by what is now going on in Europe.
I think.
How does the decadence of Christianity in Europe say anything about the nature of Islam?
His point is that orthodoxy will always reassert itself, okay? And my argument is, if that's true, how do you explain the sorry state of Christianity in Europe?
Once again, you're talking.
Exactly right.
Once again, you're talking about two different religions here. But I would like to emphasize that in the case of Christianity, you've had in Europe for a very long time, and this goes back hundreds of years, a case of a lack of orthodoxy and a question of what is truth. One of the reasons people talk about the spread of Protestantism, you have literally hundreds of sects claiming to represent, and this goes into issues of Christian theology, which I don't want to get into because it's off topic, but when it comes down to what is Christianity, what is, in the case of church leadership, who is in charge, there is in many other countries outside of Europe, there is a resurgence of orthodoxy. And also within Europe, as you said, people have given up. People have chosen to stop believing. As I mentioned in the case of Islam, the problems with Islam will cease when people stop believing in Islam. And this is the case of a personal decision. I don't believe in this religion anymore. I do not believe in this philosophical system and way of life. And that comes from within. So, with regard to Americanization, until people stop believing in Islam, and that's a gradual process.
We're going to have a guy with a guitar singing,
Well, maybe American society would not accept religious Orthodox Jews too.
The reason for the amendment is that, the amendment has nothing to do with anything other than Islam. The need for the amendment comes from the fact that the First Amendment says that there shall not be any restriction on religion. That means that any restriction on Islam, including attempts, as the lady further back mentioned, attempts to restrict the spread of Sharia by judicial means, would probably be stopped on the basis of the First Amendment. I am saying that as long as the First Amendment is in place, we are essentially helpless to defend ourselves from Islam. That's why, either through statute or through amendment, you could have a statute which says that under the laws of the United States, Islam is not a religion for the purpose of the First Amendment.
Right.
Islam is a political movement, which is antithetical to our Constitution, our way of life, just as communism was, and perhaps it could be done on the basis of, but the point is, one way or another, we have to get around the First Amendment. So let's say there was such an amendment. It wouldn't affect any other religion. This amendment would only be about Islam.
Well, Larry,
the First Amendment would still exist.
Under sedition laws, because really it's advocating in its orthodox the overthrow of another country and the overthrow of all other religions and all other cultures. So under our sedition laws and all the laws we have to defend a sovereign state, this particular ism can't coexist with ours. So we
but are they committing sedition right now? That gets problematic. Are they actively seeking to overthrow the government and Constitution of the United States right now? I'm not aware of that.
Well,
their long range goal is to do that by gaining power, and they're operating to a large extent legally. So, as long as the First Amendment does create our own helplessness. Sir.
Does it bother you that your that your idea is? It just seems like that's never going to happen, whether it's ethical or not ethical. I personally think it's, to me, I thought I was a conservative until I met you, but I don't see why that would even help you. I mean, why wouldn't you take a logical step further, since you're putting it all out there anyway, that the whole thing is bad news, and by containing them in their own neighborhood, it's not even going to work. You'll still have hell at the airports and at the Capitol, because all you need is one loon. And if you're going to talk about dogma, the dogma of their religion is you have to turn every blade of grass over in every place that has never been seen by a Muslim. I mean, that's part of the inherent religion.
That's why my solution is the simplest. The goal is to...
But is that what you really mean? I mean,
the goal is to remove is to remove the Muslim populations from the West.
But that's not even going to help. I mean,
why?
Because their reason for being is to spread it out, so you'll always be battling them in a realistic kind of way. It's just not a realistic approach, it seems.
Well,
why not
if
tempt
they
them
are,
with the fruits of American culture? Look how many other religions don't stick to the dogma. I mean, if you go to Hasidism, they don't want, pantsuit-clad bike riders in their neighborhood. To me,
okay, so you believe that you believe that Islam is basically not any different from any other religion, and that...
No, in its dogma, I think it's got a lot of big problems, but I think most people don't follow dogma. What percent of people, Jews, what percent of Jews follow the dogma?
You only need a few.
Yeah, but you'll have them anyway. You're going to have them anyway. It's not a realistic solution.
Well, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
So let's say it was 1960, and we hadn't passed the 1965 Immigration Act yet, and it's proposed that we open up immigration on an equal basis to every country in the world, which is what happened in 1965. And you're one of the legislators. You're in the U.S. Senate. Would you support a bill that opens up immigration from all the Muslim countries into America?
I'd be afraid. Why not just open the border now with Mexico instead?
Oh, no. And let's stay with one. Let's stay with one issue at a time.
I don't know. I don't know.
And what is the work that would really work?
Test them with the American way, with logic, with whatever.
Assimilation. We can assimilate them. Okay. There's the assimilation solution to Islam.
If you don't mind, I'd like to comment on that. In the 1950s, there was a young Muslim man who came to America, and he was very fascinated with American culture and American life. He was well exposed to it. He lived for at least 4 years during his college years, and he experienced everything that a young American male would experience. And he later on wrote about it extensively. His name was Syed Qutb. He was involved with the Muslim Brotherhood. He was a terrorist. He was executed by the Anwar Sadat regime in 1972 for sedition against the government. His conclusion was that American life and all its fruits were decadent, terrible, and unworthy, and Islam was the only solution to decadence which he saw. Just because we have cultural offerings that we offer people, money or whatever else they would like, it does not mean they're going to accept that, because Islam, and as much as we can see critical aspects of it, it does answer some questions. What is the purpose of life? Why do I exist? Is there a God? How do I get to heaven? What am I supposed to do to be good? What is good? What is evil? The big questions that people think about. And it provides a convincing answer for many people, and many do believe it honestly in faith. And theologically, yes, it does have some good answers in these aspects, but as I pointed out, there are many problematic theological issues. And when one truly believes in Islam and truly follows it, these issues inevitably manifest in various forms, but they do manifest in a certain way.
Thank you. I'd like to thank both of you for your presentations.
Thank you.
And my question relates to your reaction to this. You're kind of looking at things from a macro point of view.
Okay.
And I'll just say this about the First Amendment. I have to get this off my chest. Radical Islam would like to get rid of the First Amendment also. And they're trying to do that in cases in the UK and up in Canada.
Yes, that's true.
Okay, so the First Amendment protects us, in my opinion, in my humble opinion. Okay, but getting back to the proactive approach, it seems, how do you react to that? There's 1.5 billion Muslims in the world. Whether we got rid of all the Muslims in this country or not, we still have the internet. Okay? People get self-radicalized in this country. People in our prisons, people who are locked up, become radicals.
Very correct. Okay. I think with regard to the issues of radicalization, certain kind of mental pattern, there's a certain kind of absolutism that possesses them all. The question is, and this is what concerns me the most, is a person doing, say, an abortion clinic, as an example, is that person acting in accordance with the orthodox teachings of his faith? Is that person acting in accordance with orthodox religious teaching or not? In the case of Islam, these people do, and they act, I said, as in accordance of Islamic theology that stems from the dogma that is unchanging. In the case of Christianity, Judaism, or other religions, at least speaking for Christianity and for Judaism, most oftentimes these people don't. They act out of their own personal conviction, but it does not mean that his beliefs represent what the faith that he is claiming to hold. And that, I think, is the very key, important difference.
Yes, regarding the assimilation, Islam permits the killing of Muslims who are not truly observant. So we would only be magnifying the problem, really. And in fact, it seems to permit the killing of Muslims for the greater good of Islam, because the Iranians sometimes talk about, well, we wiped out Israel, we'll also wipe out half of Iran. That's fine, because it will be for the greater good. Mm-hmm. And one other question I wanted to ask you, you said jihad is only a mabuf, neither here nor there, neither... I thought jihad was the ultimate, and the martyr is the ultimate in Islam, the revered figure who lives forever.
Two aspects. Let me clarify that one for you first. When I said it was maqbool, and that means acceptable. And I was speaking when I said that in the context of permissibility to engage in jihad, at the very least, in the very lowest, in the most liberal-minded sense that I could have, it's considered maqbool, which means acceptable. And that is, it's neither harmful nor helpful. As you said, in the case of martyrdom is regarded very highly, and martyrdom in Islam is defined not as one dies for the faith out of a persecution or execution by someone else, but usually it is defined as one who dies while actively waging war against somebody else. And that is jihad. What I'm just emphasizing is, from the most liberal possible perspective, it is at the very least acceptable. That is the very lowest degree that is regarded within Islam. It is regarded very highly, and it is true that in Islam, martyrs, those who die in jihad, are given the most bountiful rewards in paradise. And as the Hadith says, their rooms will smell like musk, and they'll have 72 virgins, and they'll enter through the martyr's gate into a Jannah, which is Islamic heaven.
Are you saying that there is no command to wage jihad or to financially assist people waging jihad?
What I'm saying is, it's not required in the most liberal sense. I'm speaking of in the most liberal-minded sense. It's not mandatory, however, it is at the very least permissible. It is oftentimes in Islam is recommended.
Is it anything more than just permissible?
Far more.
So what is it beyond permissible?
Considered as something that is very notable and very good and very recommended. Mm-hmm. And like I said, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give a holistic perspective here. In other words, if I'm trying to account for all possible perspectives about, in this case, jihad within Islam. I'm certainly not saying that jihad is condemned by Islam, because that's not the case at all, if that's what you're thinking.
Why? I'm curious. Why did you emphasize the idea that jihad is only, in the most liberal interpretation, permissible? Why is that significant?
Because most people are not aware of that. Most people are not aware of that. Many people they are correct to recognize that jihad is something that happens very frequently in Islam and is commended by Islam to do. However, in recognizing that many people think that jihad is something that is absolutely commanded always for every single Muslim must go out and blow themselves up on a train or something. Right. That's not correct. Right. What I'm just trying to emphasize is the whole range of opinions that exist about jihad, of orthodox views. So that way, yes, in the very lowest possible sense, it is permissible. In the most conservative sense, it is not mandatory, but it is almost mandatory for one's salvation. In the absolute most conservative sense. Once again, that's so you can see a broad range of views. Yes, sir.
Well, I just have a few things to say. I'm new to all of this, so you're making quite an impression on me. This problem is very paradigmatic in nature. The two lines of thought. One line of thought says I'm going to be rewarded if I destroy in this life, and the other line of thought says I'm going to be rewarded in the... That's how I see it.
I would emphasize that with that, you mentioned people recognizing their problems, or in this case, the problem that is found in their religion, or the issues. There's a Coptic Orthodox priest by the name of Father Zakaria Boutros. Some of you may have heard of him. Father Boutros, what he does is he speaks in Arabic, and what he does is he discusses issues like this from the Quran and the Hadith, various theological and issues of Islamic Sharia law, jurisprudential issues. And he has made thousands, I mean literally thousands of converts from Islam to Coptic Orthodox Christianity because of the fact that he talks about these issues, and people recognize that despite this is what they were brought up with, there is something fundamentally wrong, missing, or that is not right. Or when in comparison to what I see as being offered to me, why do I want to continue to persist in my current beliefs? A great example of this is actually the situation in Africa. I was listening recently to an Arabic commentary. It was on Al Jazeera with a very well-known Muslim missionary from Libya. And he was talking about a problem in Africa in which in 100 years, 67% of all their Muslims have apostatized. 67% of all of Africa. Most of the ones that are left are mostly left in the Arab portion of North Africa. And the reason why is because of mostly Christian missionary work, primarily between Catholics and various Pentecostal sects. But the reason why this has happened is, as I'm listening to this interview, it shows that people are being offered a different alternative. They see that there is something that is found within, in this case, Christianity, that Islam does not possess, something that is dignified, something that is positive. And so as much as we tend to focus on the negative aspects of what may happen, I emphasize at the end of my talk there is much hope, because in spite of these problems, people can, if over time, gradually come to see these issues, their theological roots, and decide for themselves what they want to follow.
But you've indicated that the Islamic individual views all other religions as having no dignity whatsoever.
That is true.
Can I jump in?
Please.
What Andrew, Mr. Bizot, is talking about is the possibility of converting people out of Islam to Christianity or some other religion. Now this is what I have a question for.
I think the objectives have to be clearly defined before you can change anything. And there has to be a distinctive paradigm that's outlined, and the steps should be very clear in terms of how you're going to go from step A to step B to step C.
And it's very true, and a lot of that has been going on in a very organized and methodical manner.
I'd like to ask Andrew, you seem to be saying that converting Muslims en masse to Christianity is the way to save the West from Islam. Are you saying that?
What I'm saying is conversion, I think I said before, is this particular issue is part of a larger solution. So yes, we do have to protect ourselves. However, in addition to protecting ourselves, and once again, this is part of a holistic solution, is that we must engage in dealing with Islam in intellectual change. An intellectual change which can involve religious conversion, which can involve a simple change of mindset. It can involve a change of how one perceives Islam completely. And it can involve a change of mixing, of culture, of aspects of how does Islam mix into America, and how does it eventually, basically...
Do you think it's possible to bring Islam to an end by conversion?
Islam to an end? Well, I will quote for you what the Sheikh said in that Al Jazeera interview. He said, and now this is in the context of Africa, this is not the context of the West I'm speaking. He said in the context of Africa, the situation is Islam could die out within 50 years. No, there is Sub-Saharan Africa.
No, in Sub-Saharan Africa. They'll move to Europe.
Africans will die out in 50 years.
Oh.
What I'm saying, though, specifically is that, yes, this is an important aspect, but within that, we have to watch for ourselves, and we have to take cultural measures, we have to take societal measures, whatever those are, in order to protect ourselves. So I think I'm saying pretty much what I've always said, perhaps in a different form, but...
Well, before we go back to you, is there anybody else that has a question?
Yeah, reading recently that as they are permitted to question their faith through the internet, the Muslims, could that possibly open the door to larger conversion?
What I'm speaking about is it has opened the door in the case of the internet, and it's changed many people. And like I said, I'm speaking about from the perspective of conversion alone. With the case with Islam, I'm not trying to give any pipe dreams here. What I'm saying is the situation with our society has taken a very long time to develop, and it's going to take a very long time for, if we are hoping for a reversal or we're hoping for a change, it'll take a long time for it to happen. It'll be generational. As that sheikh I quoted said, we're not talking 2 or 3 generations, we're talking 10, 20, 30. But, once again, the idea here is setting up a situation where society can be stable and propagate itself long term. And then in this case it involves a change within the Islamic mindset, moving essentially out of Islam.
How many Muslims do you think are actually radical? In the percentages, what we are being very conservative here.
In the world?
In the world.
I have.
They say 10%.
Well, then that's the.
200 million.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
huge.
So you're talking about.
You could say that in Indonesia, which is the largest Muslim country in the world, there has been a reversal in the government in Indonesia from a purely Islamic government back to somewhat, I wouldn't call it secular, but a more liberalized version. So
regarding Indonesia, during Israel's war with Gaza, there were camps in Indonesia where people were already training to ship off to Gaza to fight. So I don't know how liberal Indonesia is becoming. I mean, I'm not sure about that. But they're saying that about over 100 million Muslims are radical.
I wouldn't want to put a number on that because I don't find it a place to put a number on who is radical. How do you define radical?
How many Muslims are Orthodox? Because you said that Orthodox Muslims pretty much have views which we would hold to be radical.
I certainly don't have time to ask 1.3 billion Muslims if they're Orthodox. What I'm saying is, within Orthodox Islamic orthodoxy, these theological tendencies are there. And as I mentioned, whether one actively supports them or chooses to deny them, they still exist and they are prevalent and they cannot be removed from the faith. So if one chooses to follow them, it's not wrong that he chooses to do that. It's not wrong. It's the point that I'm trying to emphasize here. So yes, while individual people or even entire peoples, for whatever reason, might choose to, as Pope John Paul II would say, take a cafeteria approach to their religion. I don't want to associate that with a number because, once again, I can't give you an exact number. What I'm saying is Orthodox Islamic theology itself is inherently programmed for its very internal nature to have, once again, a mentality where it wants to spread and bring other people into its fold, and a mentality that denies the humanity of non-Muslims.
I think what Andrew was saying, if I can add something here, is that the number does not matter. What matters is the principle, and the dogmas that define Islam will always be what is most active and authoritative within Islam. So whatever the number is at any given moment that we, by some definition, define as radical, it doesn't matter. Radicalism will always be, there will be periods of abeyance, but radicalism will always be there, and in any confrontation between radicalism and more moderate forms, the radical forms will always have the theological advantage.
Thank you.
I think if people got out there and the media said, guess what, guys, wake up, okay? It's not a small radical, it's actually 30%. Let's get a number going. 300 million of them want to do this. People might say, ooh, that's something significant, and it's not a peaceful religion, because that's what people believe here. It's peaceful, it's good. And you know what? They come to this country, they come to other countries. You think, you're talking about, conversion and generational changes. It's not going to happen. If they're not changing and they're hanging out in bars and going to gyms and living the American dream and going to American colleges because of their headset, if they're not changing that way, they're not taking it in and they're here, they're in Europe, it's not happening. They're getting more radical than their parents even. Okay, we got to get that information forward. Even if it's to the government, like our government, who's completely turning their eyes, I think every congressman, I think every senator needs to have sent to them exactly translations, what the Quran's calling for, what they think of Jews. I think we need to get to our government on some kind of unity that this is what the Quran means, okay, and this is what's happening.
But the information that they're teaching in the mosques and the madrasas, that are Saudi funded, people don't know what they're teaching in there. They don't know it. They should see what it is. Then they'll know what the dangers are. It would be very good. Because Helen Thomas, that old lady reporter, she said, why do they hate us? What do they want from us? She's actually voicing, it sounded idiotic, but when you really think about it, we have not named who this enemy is, what they think. We don't know our enemy. They know us, and they're playing us like a fiddle. We need to tell all of America who they are.
And that's precisely what I'm saying.
Yes.
We have to identify this as Orthodox Islamic theology.
Yes.
That is the problem. That is what we have to focus on, because that is the core out of which all of these other issues germinate. It is from that which they come, and it is to that which they return. And if we focus on anything other than that, it will just lead us to non-valid or useless conclusions. We've had too many of those.
We have to stop this political incorrectness of not describing someone or something for
Right.
what it is.
But see, I have a political correctness I have a problem with conservatives. It's true to say that that's political correctness, but I don't think it is sufficient to say, well, that's political correctness. Okay, then if we get rid of political correctness, then what do? Political correctness is just the enforcement mechanism of the ideology of our society, which is liberalism, which is the belief that it is wrong to discriminate against non-white or non-Western groups and it's wrong to suggest any significant difference between groups. And if there are differences, then they must be covered up. So if blacks are far more committing violent crime than others, that point is never mentioned. So, and why is that once again? Well, because everybody is assumed to be the same, and if you say that everybody is not the same, then that is morally wicked. Now, unless that belief is directly identified and opposed, then we're not going to be able to change it. And I feel that when conservatives complain about political correctness, even though that statement is true, I think they're not getting to the heart of the problem. And the heart of the problem is that we're not supposed to discriminate or make any differences between groups.
Judeo-Christian philosophy is a life-embracing philosophy. So this is what you have. That's why they can send their kids out to be suicide bombers and martyrs, and that's the highest thing their kid could be. That couldn't happen in Jewish Christian homes because we value life. We don't want our children to die for any reason.
Right.
So, that's the core of it.
That's their right.
Not to kill us. Not in
No,
American society.
to turn their children into suicide bombers.
In American society, and the parents cannot kill them.
Thank you.
All righty. I want to thank Larry and Andrew for that presentation that they just did for us. There was a lot mentioned on the First Amendment. Now, with like so many other things with the Constitution, people do not understand it, especially they don't understand our history, they don't understand the Constitution, and they especially do not understand the First Amendment. And this is what we teach in our law classes that we do here on Wednesday and Thursday nights. But because it came up so often here, we only have 20 minutes left, I'm going to give you a history course. I'm going to give you an understanding, and it's all verifiable. It's something that we should have been taught growing up. We probably did get little parts of it, but never the whole picture. They never gave us the whole picture, if you will. People quote the First Amendment. They, first of all, don't quote it in its entirety. And they leave out the key word of that sentence. And going by memory, since I was too lazy to bring the link up tonight, yes, it says that the government shall not impose a single religion upon the people. Well, there's a word missing. It clearly says the federal government shall not impose a single religion. All right, that is key, because in the Founding Fathers' day, the colonies, the original 13 countries that make up the Union, did in fact impose, through their original organic constitutions, a specific religion. It was a right that is held in the 10th for the states to rule their own individual country, their own individual state, to rule as they seem fit. The federal government would not impose a single religion upon the individual colonies. However, the individual colonies did, and still do, in fact, have on the books the ability and the right to do so. And they have done this. This is how Rhode Island was founded. The original colonies separated because they were separated by religious aspects. They were all Christian-based, but they were different denominations. So New Jersey would say, okay, we're the diehard Roman Catholics. Anybody who's not diehard Roman Catholics, you got to move to New York or one of the other countries. And that's what people did. Okay? A society, a community, is made up of like-minded people. And that's how it was in the beginning. If you were not of the same custom and usage, everybody here is Roman Catholic. If you're not of that common law, custom and usage, then you cannot live here because your moral code or dogma would be different than ours. So let's say you're Presbyterian. Okay, all Presbyterians must live in Maine. Okay, all Baptist, Southern Baptist, they all got to live in Virginia. Okay, that's why they're also referred to as the Southern, is because actually the Baptists all formed their colony, if you will, in the southernmost country of the 13 original colonies. Now, the founder of Rhode Island, he had a different view on religion. And he originally started out in New Jersey. And New Jersey was like, no, sorry, this is our custom and usage here, and we would expect you to abide by that. So then he went to another country, and then another, and another, and he finally ended up over in New York. And while he was in New York, he had discovered that, well, you know what? There's this area of landmass that's connecting in this area, and he's like, and he asked the original 13 colonies at the conference, and he asked, does anybody claim any rights over this particular section of land? And everybody said, no, there's no colony established there. He goes, fine. I'm taking that colony, then I'm going to, start the government there. And that's what he did. He went over to this section of landmass. He went in there. There was no other political power involved, no other Congress or community or government set up, and he set up Rhode Island with a different view on religion. And that's how Rhode Island came about to be a part of the Union. So people quote the First Amendment saying, oh, well, they can't impose a religion. You're right. The federal government cannot impose a religion. The states' constitutions, if you read them, clearly do. Many of them did. Today, they changed the wording slightly, but if you read it, you can see they actually do. In my country of Florida, it very clearly states in our Constitution, all right, and you got to realize, you guys as American citizens, as U.S. citizens with non-status, you are part of that federal government. So you're part of that Constitution, that rule of land, that slavery system. But when we teach expatriation and correction of status, put you back in your state's constitution, back in your state's government. And my country of Florida clearly states that will allow you to name your religion. Basically, you can name it whatever you want to call it. You want to call it Froggity Jump Frog, we don't care. However, if your dogma, if your moral code is not the equivalent of us here, then we have the right to shut you out. It is still in our Constitution here in Florida. Florida has the power, a constitutional power, to remove Islam and the Muslim faith tomorrow if they wanted to. And you simply, governor could come down. We're enforcing this section of our Constitution. Our Constitution states if your religion has anything to do with honor killings or anything that's against our moral code of life, liberty, and happiness, and you are all about death, killing, and conquering, guess what? You're not part of our custom and usage here. You do not belong here. Our Constitution does not allow you to be here. Sorry, move your ass further north. Go to another country in the Union that will openly accept you. Well, we have plenty of those right now. We have countries right now that make up the United States that are almost now 85% ran and controlled and run by Muslim and Sharia. And people don't realize this. It's getting bad, folks, real bad. They have literally infested and have taken over a couple of countries here in the Union. It's scary stuff. And if we don't wake up and we don't start realizing and understanding what the truth is, what the law actually teaches us, and what's really going on, of course, people are going to be like Larry, well, the First Amendment, we got to change the First Amendment, or we got to do this, or we got to do that. You don't even know what you're talking about in that aspect from the legal side, because it doesn't state what you're stating. It states the federal government. They put that in there clearly because when they came over from Great Britain and they moved out of Britain and all that, they were under King George's rule. King George's rule was everybody here will be Catholic. That's the end of the story. If not, we kill you. And they didn't like that. They left because of the religion prosecution. That's why they came to America. That's why they came to the new land, okay, and colonized the new land. The number one reason was for religious freedom. And that is why they put that in the federal Constitution, in the federal compact, was to ensure that the federal government, which is the king, the rulership, would not impose upon the individual states, the individual countries making up the Union, one stage of religion, because that was the same thing that King George did. And they didn't want nothing to do with it. And they knew they put that in writing for that reason. However, the individual colonies did put it in their constitutions. And they laid it out. They pulled no punches. This is our custom and usage here in New Jersey. If you're going to live in New Jersey, you are going to worship as we do. You're going to practice as we do and follow the dogma as we do as Roman Catholics. You don't like it, move elsewhere. And that's exactly what the colonies did. People of like-minded beliefs, like-minded moral codes, colonized together. That's what it's all about, folks. This whole melding pot of America is a failed experiment. You cannot meld together people of different cultures, different moral codes, different mindsets. It doesn't work. It incites violence, criminal activity on all levels. It just doesn't work. If the original colonies had stuck to the original plan, that everybody here is this, everybody here is this, everybody's here, all like-minded people, if it remained that way, if we enforced it that way in our own little local community, and this could be even a color issue. It can come down to, hey, custom usage here in my little community is white. You're a different color, you're a different nationality, boom, moved to the neighborhood 3 blocks away. Or whatever the case may be. And that eliminates the crime for that little tiny community. If you're all of like-minded people, you're not going to rob, kill, murder, rape of each other, are you? No, because you all have the same moral code. You know it's wrong, you're not going to do it. It works, folks. It's the way it was set up biblically. It's the way it was set up through history. It's only when we get away from that original morals of like-minded and custom and usage that we end up with a society like we have here in America today, which is just a mishmash, melting pot of garbage, quite frankly. It's garbage. Because we no longer know who we are. Our nationalities have been usurped. Our states have been usurped. Most of our sovereignty of the state has been usurped. The states, because everybody went around voting and was all hyped to become U.S. citizens, the state local governments lost their citizenships because that was all usurped. And we're only just now returning back to it. That is your republic, folks. I'm not talking party lines here. I'm talking Republican as far as de jure, founding of form of political
government.
body, or democracy, which we live in today, which we hear about day in and day out, which is going out there and killing in the name of democracy. We're pushing it all over the fucking globe. Wake up. We can take this country back, just like Andrew has showed us. And it starts with you doing the right thing, embracing those who are doing it wrong, and showing them the right way. Now, it's not always going to work. Just like he also gave that example of the one guy who was Muslim, came here, grew up here, went to college here, graduated our university here, was fully aware of all our cultures, all our music, all our history, everything. Turned around when he graduated, he went back to his Muslim country. He became the leader of one of the terrorist groups, the Brotherhood. All right, he became a higher up of the Brotherhood, and finally we caught him and we killed him. So it doesn't always work, but at least it's a start. And we don't have to worry about it going against Muslims. We got to worry about our own damn communities. We drive around my neighborhood all the time. We have a very mixed culture in my neighborhood, but we're all of the same custom and usage. We're all of the same moral code. And trust me, it doesn't matter the color of your skin. But if you come in my neighborhood and you start acting like riffraff, you start keeping your property looking like crap, your kids are out, breaking into houses or doing property damage or something like that, you won't be here long. We'll burn you out just like the KKK. But we ain't after color. We don't give a shit if you're white, black, green, or purple. Your moral code does not match our little community that I live in. And we're not a gated community, folks. And we're far from perfect. But guess what? Because we are that way, in the last 40 years of our little development here that we have, I think there's been one incident of a criminal act of a robbery, and it was done by a couple of teenagers because of another teenager, and they didn't go in and rob the house in the aspect of turning it over, this, that, and the other thing. They went in and stole some video games kind of deal, and they didn't live here. They weren't from here. They were from the neighborhood next door. So in 40 years, we've had one incident of crime in my little neighborhood, because if you bring your property looking like crap, that brings my property value down, and we won't have it, and we don't give a shit who you are, and we have police officers that live here with us. So you think you're going to call the cops on us? Guess what? You call the cops over here because we're pushing you out and forcing you to leave. They're never going to respond. We will burn you out in a heartbeat. Now, I'm not inciting violence, but you need to confront these losers, these dirtbags of society, if they're bringing down your little community. And it's not a color thing, folks. We have every color in the world you can think of here, and we're all great friends. Our doors are left unlocked. Our keys are in the ignition. Our kids are all watched out after. Anything happens, somebody needs to go to the bathroom or run the other side of the neighborhood, you don't think nothing of it. You walk up the door, you knock on the door. Can I use your bathroom? Boom, come on in, use the potty, say thank you, and off you go, back out and playing. Because we're that type of community. Because we're tight. And that's what we're missing here. But people need to start understanding before they start quoting shit like the First Amendment. Oh, I say duh because that's what they're saying. Because they don't know their ass from the hole in the ground. They don't know law. And they just talk like a bunch of idiots once you start learning the truth. Anyway, we got last under 4 minutes here, Jose. He's been sitting with us the whole show. Thank you for joining me, brother. Appreciate it.
It's a pleasure, Doc. Yeah, that thing about keeping the yard, just as an example, I was probably a bit of an ass last year. I didn't mow the yard but maybe 4 times between April and September. So it got pretty wild, But I wanted to see what the land would look like here if I didn't. I wanted to see how fertile it could be or it could get. That's good land. Now I have different plans for this coming year. Yeah, I'll be mowing the lawn a lot more often, but there's going to be planting going on this year.
It's not a matter of mowing the lawn. In that aspect. Believe they don't take their trash out. They're hoarders. You ever see hoarding on TV. That kind of event. You don't maintain your household, your front yard. That is an impression on all of us. And plus, you probably live in have much larger land. You have some farming land there, especially in ranchers. You have a lot greater land mass to deal with. It's not a matter of just mowing the lawn. It's having personal respect. I don't care what you do with your property, but don't have a bunch of garbage and trash there that's going to end up bringing, every type of wildlife you can think of, and start infesting my house with bugs and critters, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, no, my experiment last year was pumpkins. I had a pumpkin patch in the front yard.
Awesome.
Yeah, no, well, you can't mow around a pumpkin patch because it's just too tight. And these leaves are huge, and so I mowed very little up front. I didn't mow at all in the back. I tried to keep it neat. We've got flowers, I'm not big on flowers, but the wife likes flowers. I had pumpkins. We had a nice pumpkin patch. It was great, I'm going to do that again. I'm going to do more pumpkins this year. And I just, a little bit here in one spot. I'm going to see if I can get the whole front lawn turned into one big, huge pumpkin patch. Not because I don't want to mow. It's because, I like pumpkin pie. Honestly. That's the only reason.
There you go, brother. We're down to the last 30 seconds here.
Good night, all.
Good for everybody for joining us. We probably don't know if we're going to have anything coming up for next Friday for a special, but please come back and join us each Wednesday and Thursday nights when me and Jose will be back with the law and the truth, community and the Constitution. Until next time, folks, God bless and good night.